Hello there. Today I want to share with you my 3 favorite pieces of evidence that support the existence of God. And I know that that's a sensitive subject for a lot of you, and if you can't handle it, then just don't watch the video. But, just my recommendation is soften your heart, chill a little bit. I'm not here to say that, I'm proving that God exists. I'm just going to lay out the evidence. And the evidence can be interpreted kind of however you want to interpret it, So what I find in my experience is that when dealing with these concepts, it has less to do with the evidence and has more to do with kind of where your heart is and how you perceive the world. All right? I kind of want to preface this with some other things just to kind of get an idea of kind of what I'm trying to get at. And most of you know this. I was pretty much atheist a large part of my life and agnostic for a very long time. So I understand the other side. I get it. So and I'll mention that side too. So I'm going to present kind of the evidence and kind of say how an atheist would interpret it and how somebody who believes in God. Now, God, that word, that can be interpreted a lot of different ways too, right? I'm going to keep it very vague on I'm not going to go into specifics on religion. If you are a Christian, or even if you're not a Christian, you're just interested in the evidence that supports Christianity, there's a really good book. It's called A Case for Christ. And in that book, it's about a lawyer, and he's an atheist, and his wife was an atheist, if I remember correctly. And she ends up turning into a Christian. And that pisses him off because he sees that she's doing all these things, and he builds up a lot of resentment for her. So what he decides to do is prove that Christianity is not true. So he runs basically the Bible through the same scrutiny that you would see in a courtroom to prove or disprove it. And as he went through the evidence, all the different types of evidences, he ended up basically concluding that it's true. There's other books like that, but my point is, if you're looking for specific evidence for Christianity, Case for Christ is a good resource there. Now, I'm just going to kind of be talking about God, just kind of general, and I realize I'm thinking of God in kind of like a creator sense, okay? Like God created the universe, or God created life on earth, or God created human beings, okay? Now, the evidence that I'm going to present, you can think of it's just like raising or lowering the probability that something's true. Again, you're the one that ultimately interprets the data, okay? If you think of like a court case, like let's say O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson, there was a court case, there's a lot of different evidence that was presented for or against him. But if you ask people, do you think O.J. is guilty or innocent, about 50% think he's guilty, about 50% think he's innocent. Okay? There's a lot of different evidence presented there. So I forgot the stats on it, but there's a lot of statistics there that astronomically kind of show that he did it. But then you could always take the position of, well, it was planted there. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what evidence is presented. The O.J. Simpson case is just kind of an analogy towards God, because you can receive it however you want. I'll give you an example. Let's say if I were to tell you that the universe was created yesterday, exactly like it was yesterday. How could you prove me wrong? Well, you might say, well, of course, Paul, the universe is way older, the earth is way older. Here's a picture on my phone from last week. I'll say, no, that picture was created just yesterday. You'll say, well, I have memories in my mind about 10 years ago. Well, those memories were created just yesterday. So, of course, that might be a dumb example to some of you, but the point is you can never know 100% really anything. All right? So, scientific evidence is repeatable and testable, but there's a bunch of other kind of evidence that we can look at to kind of, for example, logical evidence. Like logically, you would think that, hey, well, we have pictures in our phones, memories, this and this and this. You kind of conclude that, hey, I think the universe is older than a day. You have mathematical evidence. Like math is just like, it's kind of like in the air, really, like points and lines and planes. There's these theoretical concepts, but it's still a form of evidence. And I'm not an expert, and I'm not trying to say, I'm not well versed in all these different evidences. All I know is there's a bunch of different kinds of evidence that kind of raise or lower the probability that something's true. Okay? So you can't just look at repeatable scientific evidence. Like think of like a murder. Like if somebody's fingerprint is on something, that's not repeatable. Yes, you can repeatedly test the fact that that is a fingerprint or not, but the murder happened once. It's not like ongoing. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much. Okay, so here we go. Here are the evidence. The evidence is in support of God, okay? Now this first piece of evidence, I believe, at least I used to believe, was really weak, and I didn't like the evidence. Now that I'm kind of like, I believe in God, I see it in a different way. Okay, so you can think of it like this. Let's say you're walking in a field and you look up, you see a house. Okay? That house is complex. There's a lot of things that kind of would lead you to conclude that that house was built, that there was an architect that built that house. There was some kind of builder. Now, of course, that building could have just kind of fell into place. However unlikely that is, it's still a possibility. But kind of like your first natural instinct would say, there's a house there. And that might be a bad example because, we're very familiar with houses. I'll use another example. Let's say you're walking along the beach and you see something written in the sand. It says, let's say I see, "I love you, Paul," written in the sand. I could naturally conclude that somebody wrote that message, or I can take a position of, I think the waves just kind of hit the sand just right and the little crabs came out and they kind of dug into the ground and it just made that message on accident. Okay, both are possibilities. Now, when I look at the complexity of the universe, okay, when I look at how complex everything is, and I don't know the exact, stats on everything, but there's four main forces. You have gravity, you have electromagnetism, you have nuclear weak and nuclear strong forces, okay? Now, these forces are so exact that if you were to adjust them by just a little bit, when I say a little bit, I don't mean 1%, I don't mean like 0.01, I don't mean 0.00001, I'm talking about 0.00000, boom. Like you barely adjust gravity and Earth falls out of orbit. You make it a little stronger, it gets sucked in. You barely adjust the strong, nuclear weak forces of an atom and it just falls apart. So when you look at the universe and the way that it's constructed, I'll use that word, it's just so peculiar how everything is just perfectly put into place. Now, of course, again, all that could just be a big coincidence. If you're walking along the beach and you see a sign in the sand, it could have just happened. But the natural inclination is to say, it's a message. There's information there. When you look at DNA, that's information being passed along. That's just all an accident. Okay, that's what I used to think. It was just a big accident. But this is the thing. It requires faith either way. If you want to believe it's just one big coincidence, like I used to think, the thing is I didn't put it in perspective and think, that's requiring a lot of faith for me to think that the earth, the sun, gravity, light, all these forces that are just perfect, just everything just happened on accident. That requires a lot of faith there, okay? And it requires some faith to believe that somebody created it. So again, the evidence is there. The evidence, if you look at how finely tuned everything is, it's so much more complex than a house, really. And again, I'm not an expert on this, but if you look into physics and how everything's so finely tuned, I'm at the point now where I think it requires an extraordinary amount of faith to believe that that's just random, okay? Okay, so that's one piece of evidence, okay? Now, somebody might say, and this is what I used to say, well, you know, it's given enough time, anything will arise, anything will happen. If you get a bunch of monkeys just typing on a typewriter throughout infinity, eventually it's going to type up Shakespeare. Now, if somebody were to come and look at that writing and look through it, they'll say, well, this had to be done on purpose, with intent, right? But in reality, it was just one big coincidence. Another example I used to make, I would just find something in the room or something and just, let's say I have a bouncy ball and I just throw it like this, and I'm just throwing it throughout eternity. Eventually, it's going to do something really weird. Let's say it just lands right here, right on the edge of this chair, and it's just balancing just perfect. And right then, somebody walks in and they see it. It would be natural to conclude that somebody put that ball there. But in reality, it was just a big coincidence. And I get that. So let's just say that life is one big coincidence, you know. Peptides just happen to come together in just the right way, you know, 4 billion years ago or whatever, and from that it evolved, and then now you have humans, okay? So let's assume that that's true. That's kind of, in general, kind of like the atheist perspective. What first initially brought me to the concept of God was taking that concept and extrapolating it out to infinity. So you have infinite space within any space. So if you take basically half the distance to any point, it will kind of go on forever. So there's infinite space within all space. So within that space, there's possibilities for certain things to arise. Now that might seem, that's something called potential infinity. So there might be limits there in physics. They call it the Planck width. So let's kind of forget about that. But you can say infinity going out externally. Because the stance is, well, you have so much space, you have so much time, eventually life is just going to happen. Well, if that's the argument, one day I was thinking and I thought, well, you can take that, just keep on going. Why stop there with life? Eventually a superpower would have to arise that's infinite and that can transcend time and space. And by the way, I'm not saying that this is how God came into existence, or this is the explanation for God. But this is, in a way, kind of like a mathematical evidence, at least for God, at least a version of God. Because if you do take that stance, like if you're one of those people that use the monkey on a typewriter argument, saying that life has to pop in and all possibilities have to arise, well then you'd have to make room for the possibility of God to arise as well. And then the last piece of evidence that isn't popular, but I feel like in a way it's almost like the most powerful piece of evidence. And that is that if there's a creator of the universe, right? And somehow this creator is connected to you. The creator gives you freedom, gives you, what's that called? It's on the tip of my tongue. Free will. Doesn't make you do anything. You get to choose so much. You get to choose not to believe in him. He gives you that choice. You're so free, it's amazing. Anyway, you live in a universe to where you can never quite conclude anything. So he doesn't box you in and say, you must believe in me. He gives you that choice. He allows you to go to him or not. So this is what I'm getting at, is that you have the ability to reach out to this creator. That's what I did. Because again, I was atheist for a long time, then I was agnostic, and then I had an experience that I wanted to rationalize out. Because you can always rationalize anything. You can rationalize that God exists, you can rationalize that God doesn't exist, okay? So I found myself rationalizing that God doesn't exist, but I decided to just call out. I said, God, if you're there, reveal yourself to me. Give me faith in you. And what followed was just amazing coincidences right? So something would happen, and I thought, man, that's a big coincidence, but God doesn't exist. It can't be. But it was still in my mind. I said, let me, like, if I say, oh, I'm going to flip the coin and it's heads, boom, it lands on heads. That's a bad example, because these things that were happening to me the probability of them happening were very low. But they kept happening. They kept stacking on top of each other over and over and over and over and over again, to the point where I just had to kind of surrender, and it just swayed me over to believe in God. And I've heard stories like this over and over from people. So the point is you have the ability to kind of have experiential evidence. God's not going to force you to believe in him. He's not going to force you to, follow his ways or whatever it might be. You have that invitation. So if you go to God with an open heart and say, reveal yourself to me, I believe that he will. The Bible says, knock and the door shall be open. Okay, this video is kind of long, but I'm going to keep going anyway. Okay, so if you guys watched that previous video where I said I was talking to my client and I said, if God did exist and there was evidence, and right away she says, no, Paul, there's no evidence. Eventually she said, okay, there'd be no wars. Okay, so I kind of want to just talk about that real quick. So she has a dog and she has a cat. Okay, and sometimes they kind of get in a scuffle. So I said, the fact that your dog and your cat kind of get in fights every now and then, is that proof that you don't love them? And she said, no. And I said, well, why don't you keep them in cages? That way they can never fight. If you really love them, you would just prevent that from happening. But you can kind of see where I'm going with this. If God were to kind of box you in like that, then you wouldn't truly have free will. Free will allows you to do whatever you want, really. You can choose to, kill somebody if that's what you choose to do. And in order for God to truly love you, I believe that he truly has to allow you that free will. I know some of you are like, keyboard warriors, I'm just going to type away. Anyway, all right, so that's it, guys. That's my 3 favorite pieces of evidence for God. And I think that's all I'm going to say about that. Yeah. There's a lot of other types of evidence out there. If you're interested in the topic, there's a lot of great resources out there. If you're an atheist and you want to kind of brush up and firm your stance, I invite you to go on and kind of watch these debates. It's really, really interesting. It's a lot more complex than a lot of people give it credit for. They think it's just kind of real simple. Like, I had a conversation with Bill the other day, and he's just like, it was live streamed, so maybe some of you heard it, but he was just like, yeah, the world has come so far, and science has kind of revealed that we don't really need a God, but that's like saying you're studying a car, right? And you learn everything about the car, the internal combustion of the engine, all the little nuances of everything, and then you conclude that there was no architect. You can never study the creation enough and conclude that there's no creator. Hopefully that you follow me on that. Anyway, that's it for the video, guys. Hopefully I got your brain turning a little bit at least. And God bless you all. Peace.
It's like a stampede. They love that music. Play it again for them, so I'll give them another tune.